What if you had a product that hundreds of millions of people needed, and you could potentially make billions of dollars and add that money into your coffers to pay for things like healthcare and infrastructure? What would you do? Well, if you're Justin Trudeau, you say no. I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Jamil Jivani. Okay, Brian, I'm talking about the German Chancellor's visit to Canada recently, asking the Trudeau government to help with Europe's natural gas supply as they want to cut off their reliance on Russia. Go.
Well, Justin Trudeau says there's no business case. And as I wrote in a column this week for The Sun, there's no business case because he's made it that way. His government has been dragging their feet for years. They want to make it sound like, well, this is just something we found out about in February when Russia invaded Ukraine. We didn't know the world wanted Canadian LNG. That's not true. Back in 2015, when they took office, there were about more than a dozen proposals on the West Coast and on the East Coast. There was one on the shores of the Saguenay River in Quebec that they turned down just 3 weeks before the Russians invaded Ukraine. That would have been a great port. That one was proposed in 2014. They dragged their feet as soon as they took office because they don't want to approve any of these things. They don't think that we should be using any fossil fuels, even if it's liquefied natural gas. In 2019, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer campaigned on saying we should be building these things so that we can get India and China off of coal and onto cleaner burning liquefied natural gas. The Trudeau Liberals mocked it. They said, you don't have a climate plan. This doesn't work. It would have helped the climate. It would help with Russia now. Trudeau doesn't see it.
Jamil, this is it's one of those sorts of situations where you think this is so obvious. Canada has a resource, it's clean, and we need the money, and Europe needs the product. And we have very good relations with Germany. We have very good relations with other European allies. And because so many European countries are supporting Ukraine against Russia, Russia, petulant as it is cutting off their natural gas supply. Well, this is what the German Chancellor is saying. Canada, help us out. Why isn't the industry itself, I mean, maybe they're just so beaten down, but why isn't the industry saying, hang on a second, there absolutely is a business case here. Here it is.
It's just so many examples every day, every week, it seems, of the Trudeau administration's hypocrisy. On one hand, they'll tell us that the conflict that's happening between Russia and Ukraine is one of the biggest issues in the entire world, and that we've got to be caring about it and we've got to do things about it. They'll have President Zelensky come in and speak to people in our country, and then they'll sell technology or shift technology back to Russian-owned oil companies. Or they'll do this where there's a clear moral case, even if there's a more complicated business case, there is a clear moral case to working with Germany and undermining Russian imperialism. And the Trudeau administration seems unmoved by that. So it just feels like there's always an example of that. And when it comes to the industry speaking up and highlighting this hypocrisy, unfortunately, we've seen years and years now of business leaders in Canada, business leaders in the United States being silent, being impotent in the face of government policy that is clearly destroying industries in our country, making sure that there's less jobs, less money available to invest in important things like infrastructure. My view on it is that a lot of people in industry have sort of accepted that in order to have a good relationship with the Trudeau administration, they've got to keep their mouths shut. And that is actually not a healthy thing for a democracy at all. I mean, I think we'd like to live in a country where people feel free to speak their minds and fight for their own interests. And yet I think there's a chilling effect because the Trudeau administration has made clear they will do whatever they need to do in order to reward their friends and punish their enemies.
You know, Brian, it's akin to when President Joe Biden on his first day in office canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. Fast forward now, of course, the war with Ukraine and Russia. And Americans really need natural gas, really need our energy. So instead, the president goes on bended knee to the Saudis, who then turned around and met with China after the president's visit. You know, Saudi, no bastion of human rights or being particularly friendly to any nation around the world. Yet we have our prime minister who has seen Joe Biden in person. We see them with all their pictures with their masks off, when they're not at home. Did Trudeau even make the case for our energy, for making sure that something actually happens so we can provide our best and greatest ally with the energy supply that they need to go through the winter and survive in perpetuity, so they don't have to rely on bad actors around the world for energy? Like, I tie these two together because it's the same argument. Trudeau has this adversity to our energy supply in this country, be it natural gas or be it oil and gas.
Okay, so right now most of the conversation is about liquefied natural gas, but let's be honest, Russia exports a lot of oil, which also helps fund the war in Ukraine. So, this week on Ukrainian Independence Day, Trudeau said Canada stands with our Ukrainian friends. Just don't ask us to do anything that will stop Russia or help you. That was the subtext. We can look at Keystone XL. They will claim they made the case. They did not make a strong case. They did not work to make sure that it was sped up under the Trump administration because they just didn't like Trump. Trump actually wanted Keystone XL. Obama shut it down while Trudeau was in office. The Northern Gateway, he canceled as soon as he came into office. That would have had exports going off our West Coast. He's stymied Trans Mountain's expansion, despite it being, purchased by the government. Coastal GasLink liquefied natural gas or natural gas pipeline has had terrorist attacks on it. He hasn't invoked the Emergencies Act or sought to prosecute those the way he did with the convoy in Ottawa, but they actually engaged in violence, burning down work camps, trying to build this critical infrastructure. The Energy East pipeline that would have gone through Ontario and Quebec all the way to St. John, New Brunswick, and could have supplied Europe with our oil. He stymied that. He put roadblock after roadblock. Then he said that there would be social license for the people of Quebec, which meant you get a veto on a pipeline. We don't get a veto on stuff Quebec wants to move around the country, but Alberta oil, he did. He doesn't like the industry. He doesn't like the West. That's what's driving a lot of it. That and his green blinders. He's a green zealot, and he'll do anything that he thinks is the right thing to do on climate change, as long as it's against fossil fuels, with one exception: curbing his own air travel around the world.
No, of course, how dare he do that? Heaven forbid. Jamil, last word to you. We know that Justin Trudeau is big amongst the greeniacs around the world, particularly his pal, California Governor Gavin Newsom. They were recently together, and they were having a great old time with one another. Gavin Newsom, of course, his government in California is about to pass legislation seize the sale altogether of gas vehicles ever in perpetuity in the state of California in the next few years, for sure. So Trudeau is of that ilk, of that mindset. He looks to those sorts of policies and thinks, oh, that's sort of where we should be. But he has a responsibility to Canadians, to our economy and our future and our economic independence and sustainability of our very cold winter that's about to come. How does he, and I sound exasperated by it because it's just so obvious, but how does he make that rationale? And the last point, is there no one around that cabinet table that is saying, hang on a second, there is absolutely business case for this, not only domestically, but internationally?
Well, unfortunately, I think if anyone in cabinet makes some of those points, they might risk losing their job. So that's a disincentive, I think, to tell Trudeau something he doesn't want to hear. But I think you're absolutely right, Adrienne, that a lot of this is about our prime minister signaling to an international audience. He likes to go to these conferences with the United Nations. He likes to go to these climate change lobby events and be greeted like a rock star because he's willing to subordinate his country's best interests to the desires of the international climate lobby. Very few other heads of state are willing to do that. So it makes him look like he's some sort of warrior for the greater cause. And I think that's probably what his future looks like after politics, is that he'll be involved in a lot of these international climate change lobby organizations. I know that's one of the reasons why Barack Obama likes him so much, and a lot of other American politicians, is that he's willing to accept their narrative about our oil and gas industry and to be a mouthpiece for narratives that don't serve our country's interests well at all. And I think Brian's also right to call Justin Trudeau a green zealot. I think that Justin Trudeau thinks about the war on carbon or the war on climate change much like politicians of past decades thought about the war on drugs. It is such a myopic, single-minded point of view to make this moral claim that they're willing to deal with whatever consequences it has for other people, even if the evidence piles up that it's hurting working class people, it's hurting farmers, it's hurting people who have integral jobs for our economy to function. They're willing to sacrifice all of that suffering for the sake of being able to feel like they are on a moral high ground.
Sadly, the only thing that's going to change this mentality is likely a change in government. Log on to Facebook and Twitter. Let us know what you think, and go to torontosun.com to get more on stories like this and many others, and coverage that you won't find anywhere else.